Welcome to the Metric Stack podcast. Your hosts, Allan Millar and Lauren Thibodeau, will talk to founders, leaders, marketers, and more to uncover how they succeed with data. Whether you're struggling with data, reluctant to take the leap, or maybe you're a seasoned expert with years of experience, you'll hear stories from people like you who have used data to grow and scale their business. Andrew Millar is the founder and CEO of Relogixs, a workplace insights platform analyzing over 20 million square feet of office space globally. A technology executive and commercial real estate veteran, Andrew has led large teams and has built companies from the start to the exit. A future enthusiast, he's a hacker at heart, always looking for easier, better, and more efficient ways to solve problems using the latest technology.
Andrew, we're delighted you could join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be on the show.
Andrew, you founded Relogixs over 10 years ago, 2010, a long time before COVID sort of changed everybody's lives. Let's take it back a bit because I'm super curious, how did you come up to the idea of getting into this space? Tell us what Relogixs is in a nutshell.
Allan, we had two kind of phases of our growth. When I started Relogixs 5 years back, we've always been a data company, right from the first day. We've always been in the same space. We've always been working with a Fortune 1000 size companies who have a lot of real estate space, either nationally or globally. Early days, we were an old school BI, like a business intelligence data warehousing shop, a bunch of data plumber guys, services organization, primarily delivering systems integration, that type of stuff. We always had the same challenge. Customers were trying to have a single source of truth for all their real estate and occupancy data throughout their portfolios. Early days, we were into BI and realized, and then there was the genesis of our hardware solution, our IoT and sensor solution, realizing huge opportunity to start to collect real-time data when IoT arrived. And so we spun off and headed down the road to building some hardware.
This was a major departure. So you were a services company. Where was the data coming from in the first place? If you didn't have any sensors 10 years ago, how was this data coming into play, and what prompted you to build your own hardware solution?
Yeah, early days, we were stuck with structured and unstructured data that came from other real estate applications. The corporate real estate world is pretty mature, and there's a lot of different sources, HR, IT, occupancy projects. There are a lot of data sources, and traditional methods of building a data warehouse, reporting repository, and integrating and consuming data, and then trying to make sense out of it. That was, traditional methods, but really, really bad data.
Well, yeah. As soon as you said unstructured data, I picture a whole army of, recent grads sitting in a back room trying to go through PDF documents and other things.
It was horrendous. The real estate world has always been really bad data. Spreadsheets, like spread marts. Everybody's managing data in massive spreadsheets, and that still happens today. So you could imagine you're trying to tease out insights and the data is terrible. The biggest pain was just the simple occupancy data of, how is our space being used? And the fundamental challenge they had was they sent somebody around, tried to send somebody around once a year with a clipboard and counted people. That was how they collected data. And if you have a global portfolio of millions and millions of square feet, you got to be kidding me, right?
Okay, so times have definitely changed. So you got into the hardware space, and now I know that, again, you're sort of coming full circle and you're getting a little bit more into the software space again. So, we'll touch on that later. Tell me about some of those early metrics. Were there metrics that helped you decide that you needed to get into the IoT space? What were some of the early memories of using data for your own company?
Let's say the top 25 real estate metrics that the industry has followed and had scorecards for the last 25 years. But really, when you boil it down, the cost per person, the cost per square foot, real estate is a big operational burn, right, on a company. It's very much about cost. And then the Eureka moment for me was the occupancy data. We realized and had known from the beginning that the world's real estate has been sitting half empty and always has been. And the Eureka moment was, how are we going to convince the CFO and the senior leaders of real estate in these organizations that we have to do something about this? It's just so massively inefficient and there's so much waste. And it just, hasn't really been, it's always been a focus, but it's been fairly nascent and it's been good enough. People were satisfied with the fact that they had too much space, but it was okay. And we can live with that fact. And for me, that was just unacceptable. We had to find a way to convince them with objective data that their waste is real. That's hundreds of millions of dollars in waste. And if we could surface it with objective data, we could convince them to act on it. And sensors was the obvious. When the price of sensors started to fall and IoT became real, there was an opportunity. And we thought, man, if we could deploy these sensors around the office and collect real data and collect it in real time, nobody could. It's not subjective anymore. This is the real deal. And you can't. People trust data. People, when you bring objective data in front of leaders and sit them down and say, this is the data, it's difficult for them to wiggle their way out of it.
Andrew, I want to come back to sensors in a moment, but let me just pick up on your Eureka moment. So you had a Eureka moment yourself. You had this epiphany, holy, we can actually now show that there's all this waste in the system. Can you take us back? What was it like the first conversation you had where you got a CFO to have that Eureka moment? Take us back.
Yeah, the Eureka for me was I read some books and IoT. That was when I was just sitting there going, oh my God, this sensor technology, this could actually work for real estate. And I'd been working with a lot of corporate real estate leaders and knew for sure that they had major challenges. And some of them, were focused on trying to figure out how to reduce and make better use of their portfolios. And when I sat them down and said, listen, I think we can figure this out. It's more so like with the corporate real estate leaders, and you can take that to your CFO and you can sit them down and have a business case that really holds water, that you could save the company a tremendous amount of money forever if they would fund you going out and collecting this objective data. And
okay, cool.
Then it was game on.
So let's pick up on the sensor. So IoT was a whole new area. Hardware was new for you. And so here you are, you're running a company that has both a hardware component and a software component. Were the metrics for both second nature to you and your senior leaders, or was one tougher than the other to ramp up on?
Yeah, exactly. If I could go back in time, whose idea was it to get into the hardware business? My Lord. My whole career has been in software right from the first day. And it's like, I always had this, my dad was an engineer and he always said to me, and I remember it clearly, like, you're never really software's fine, but you're never really going to love it until you build something you can hold in your hand. That's what it's all about. And he was...
Oh, I can picture the father figure looming over his son, like telling him the way it's going to be, right? And you're sort of listening, right? So
I'm going to go into finance. I'm a BCom and I'm going to study numbers and all this kind of stuff. And that's a waste of time. There's nothing that's not meaningful. That's not going to impact anybody. You got to build something.
Here you are building something.
Oh my God. So I always joke, hardware. It's hard, like no kidding. Making that transition from software to hardware has been the biggest challenge for sure. Far and away, I find it far more difficult. Moving into a world where you're collecting data using a hardware device and then trying to understand, it's all about signal and noise, and it's about things like packet loss and signal strength and battery consumption. And this is hardcore stuff, and it's pattern recognition data, it's streaming data. It's a whole different universe. And for sure, no question, it's been a real challenge, and it's taken us now. So we're about 6 years doing the hardware piece now. We finally nailed it, but it's been 6 long, hard years of doing that. And then we're applying all our heritage of real estate data and then bringing in this new real-time world that we're collecting with hardware. And we're the first, we're pioneers in bringing sensors to the office. So it's new to everybody, and it's still really very much in its infancy as far as the technology goes, and how much of the world's real estate is covered with sensors. It's just a tiny, tiny little sliver so far in the world.
So outside of the data that the sensors are collecting and that your customers are using and what metrics that they're monitoring, tell me about Relogix. Are you monitoring different gross margins? Are you sort of having to think about cash and inventory differently? I think most of the listeners on this podcast are going to be in the software space. And anything hardware is really, it's deep and scary stuff, right? So are there different data points or metrics or sensitivities that you've got to consider to, keep the company surviving and thriving?
Absolutely. There's the product side of the business. So when you look at the product side, there's traditional metrics around on the product side, but you have hardware and software, and they're two different domains. But the traditional metrics are all still there with respect to running a SaaS company. You look across every operating aspect of the company, from a metrics perspective, we cover all the traditional SaaS metrics and company metrics that you would follow. But our product just happens to be, when you get into the product side, you've got to dig in a lot deeper on both sides of SaaS software metrics, as well as metrics that are coming from how do you operate, maintain, and manage a global deployed inventory, right? And physical hardware introduces inventory management and all the metrics associated with the cost of capital, working capital. It's very capital intensive, so cash management and understanding your cash flows are a lot different when you have a hardware component than you have a SaaS component, and it's a lot more difficult to scale that than it is just a straight up SaaS company.
And would you say, and I know, the future may be changing, but would you say that the hardware was the wedge in the door to sort of get customers excited, and then the data was the thing that sort of got them really attached and seeing the value? Or was it the data and the hardware was sort of the necessary evil?
Early days, and still probably today, it's really cool. It's still, like my dad said, it's really cool to have something you hold in your hand that collects data. So no matter what, when you're selling to somebody, they look at the device and they think, that's really cool? And you put it in and it collects data. But the reality is, and we've learned, is that, of course, it's the outcomes and the insights you tease out of the data that comes from a data collection device. And that's all it is. It's a piece of hardware. It collects some data. The data flows up into our cloud, and then finally we can turn that data into meaningful insights for a customer. And that's where, for us, workplace analytics is our business. It's about the outcomes, and it's about how do we help an organization to better manage their real estate portfolio. It's got nothing to do with hardware, but it's like razors and blades, I like to say, right? The more infrastructure we deploy with our sensors around the world, the more data we're capturing, the bigger our database of benchmarkable data gets, and the more powerful that infrastructure becomes to scale the business across and add SaaS and software applications that on top of the deployed infrastructure.
How important are those benchmarks? It's always a term that sort of piques my interest. Everybody always wants to compare themselves to their neighbor, their next best, the best in class. How are you guys using benchmarks? Is it a selling tool as well? Is it something that your customers are asking for?
I think today, with what's happened in the world, is suddenly there is a tremendous blind spot. The world has changed. The office has changed. The blind spot is that nobody really has benchmarkable data around how people are going to interact with the office anymore. We call it intent versus behavior. So try to understand how my people as a company, my personas and my different types of people who are working from home, working from everywhere, and coming to the office, what is that model going to look like in that pattern? And how is it going to unfold in front of us? It's all the historical data, the benchmarkable data that we had, is a lot of it's out the window. It's a pattern that we don't understand how it's going to unfold. Nobody knows the answer yet. And so we're trying to model the behavior of how people will come into the office. When will they come? What type of office space are they going to want to use when they come to the office? How much collaboration space are we going to need? How is that going to change from the models that we traditionally have measured, right? It's all different.
Andrew, you have perhaps one of the best crystal balls on this out there, given your window into the data. Like, what do you see? If you look ahead 1, 2, 3 years, what do you see being the new normal in commercial real estate?
No question, there will be a larger percentage of people that will continue to work from home and work from anywhere. And the need to come into the office is in question as far as how often and when do you need to be there. So we absolutely know that it's changed. And the future, I think, is going to be about, we finally have the opportunity to run real estate more efficiently. Everybody the light has come on and everybody has realized, oh my God, it's been so efficient. Our offices have been half empty. Why don't we just change it now so that we can actually use the office more effectively, have just enough real estate to service what we believe is what our people need in the way of the office, and reduce all that massive waste that used to be there. And now it's not, we like to say it's become a must-have for corporate real estate. There's not a CEO and CFO in the world right now who's not thinking about their real estate.
No kidding.
And so they're going, what are we going to do? And can we do it better? And can we go forward on a position of effectively using the space rather than just having way more space than we need all over the world?
I think that's amazing, right? I mean, I still can't get over the fact that you were saying pre-COVID, the CFOs, the leaders who were managing the real estate portfolio, they were okay with this inefficiency. They had too much space. It was underutilized, but whatever. It wasn't really a conversation. And now all of a sudden, for the past 18 months, this has become the conversation to have. So I know that you guys have probably gone through, a big roller coaster of emotions as a company that manages this space, but it's probably for the better that you now have a solution that can shed light on how to make the future better.
Absolutely. It has been a roller coaster for sure, Allan. And it's been just knowing this, right? You're screaming from the rooftops and nobody's listening. And you finally are resonating completely with everyone saying, hey man, I hear you now. Let's get on this. And you've got the attention of senior leadership and they're really laser focused on it. And I think they see the opportunity now, and it's also the massive catalyst for change. Right? The real estate organization always is trying to affect change to get the business to use their space more efficiently, but it's been a hoarded commodity where people would hoard their space and they'd have extra space or they wouldn't give it up because they think they're hiring more people and their business plan is supposed to grow, but guess what? It doesn't grow. So everybody has this extra space all over the place and it's super efficient, but that's just the nature of business, and it has always been. And real estate's job was to affect change. Well, COVID has affected change. That's the decision is done. And so now they don't got to go hat in hand and trying to convince the business that real estate is changing. It's changing, and for all the right reasons. And now everybody's kind of doesn't really get violently object to using space more efficiently. They all get it now, and everyone's on board with it.
Andrew, let me jump in because you've really talked about sort of how the world is changing and this opportunity that folks have been awakened to. Can you take us back to when you decided to pivot in the early days of COVID? You've been commended for what you did to support your customers. Can you just tell us what you did there to pivot? And
talk about surreal. So here you got a whole bunch of folks sitting around their monitors watching the world's offices empty out.
Yeah.
And right, not high into the right, it's just sort of falling and you're watching it and it's amazing. Like you're going, oh my God, look at that. We're down to finally 1% and now the office is practically empty. It's like, oh my God. And of course we're scared to death, right? Because for our business, I'm thinking, oh my God, are we finished? What's happening now? Where are we going from here? But soon the phone started ringing and our customers, you don't realize, and we didn't realize that when we work with big banks and government insurance companies, and we realize that a big part of their back office systems are still so antiquated that you can't move that heavy iron home. You have to sit in the office and work on these big server platforms. That's how the world's banks, a lot of them are still operated. They have huge organizations offshore that work on these heavy systems. Guess what? They weren't able to go home. And so we were like, oh my God, okay, gotcha. We can help, I think. You have essential workers. They're in the office. We need to figure something out. So we pivoted immediately to be able to say to them, okay, let's track occupancy. We can understand who is in the office, how many people are in the office. We were then able to say, okay, we know how many are there. We can also use our sensors to figure out how they're spaced out. So safe distancing. And that was meaningful because how long have people been in the office and how far apart are they? And we can model that and show customers what that looks like so they can feel like their people are safe. And then turning it towards the cleaning and being able to say, okay, these parts of the office need to be cleaned. There has been occupancy there. Let's use the data to real time control the cleaning apparatus of what gets cleaned when and what seats have been used and not been used, and sort of do real time cleaning and what we call safe seats through it. So we were relevant. We were relevant all of a sudden, and it was to be in the middle and the deep part of the pandemic there, where we suddenly had something that was relevant for our customers, and it had to do with the safety of their people, right? So it was not just relevant; it was meaningful for Relogixs and for our people to be doing something that was meaningful.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you've gone from a top level metric that is looking at cost per employee or square footage per employee. So basically a cost equation to not how dense, but how separated are people, or, which areas are they being, are being occupied, or which areas are safe areas, clean areas, green areas. So all of a sudden your sensor and your ability to analyze and look at this data and see trends, had a whole bunch of different use cases you don't think of, because you really, what the news was talking about was everybody leaving the office, right? But you're right. There are certain industries, departments that couldn't. There was probably, I don't know about healthcare, if you've got a lot of footprint in healthcare, but that probably would have been another very interesting one to track.
Yeah, we do some healthcare for sure. It's one of our smaller verticals, but for sure the healthcare community was all over the data with respect to what was going on in those spaces too. And it's really interesting to see the shift now. So that's kind of in the middle of the mess now. One interesting trend that we're seeing is it's not all about cost, right? It is about the employee experience. It's very much about that. And cost is kind of the digital exhaust, I like to say. That's a byproduct. You can be more efficient with your space, but try to take care of your people first and make their experience of work better using our data. And an interesting one now is the whole thing has shifted to, how do I create an experience that entices people to come back to the office? Guess what? Like, a lot of companies around the world are not structured to allow people just to work from home forever. You read about it and it seems like a nice thing, and a lot of companies for sure are trying to quickly morph and change so that they can do it. But there's insurance, there's taxes, there's risk, there's all these things for big companies. It's not simple. You don't just turn on a dime. And so people, this insight, they fill out the survey and say, I'm going to come in the office 2-3 days a week, but everybody's just answering the way they think the company wants them to answer. For sure, I'm going to come in 3 days a week. And then their behavior, when you model the data, you're trying to say, okay, we're going to open the office. It's going to be 25% of our people are going to return. Okay, that's great. And then it's 5%. And then the next day it's 2%. And then guess what? Nobody's coming in. And so for our customers, or corporate real estate leaders, are just really, in some cases, struggling to say, well, oh boy, this is not as easy as we thought. How do we change the office to be more collaborative in nature, to create safe spaces, to create all these things that will entice people to return to the office? We don't want to just mandate return. We want to entice them to say, you got to get out of the house for a couple of days, and here's why you should come in.
Have you seen any ahas in the data, any Eurekas there linked to employee experience, or where you're seeing the results of companies tweaking certain things and occupancy actually going up yet, or is that too soon?
Yeah, still too soon. I definitely see it east to west. So we see Asia Pac, EMEA, and now North America, kind of the three segments. Asia Pac, of course, came back the first and earliest, and back and forth, right? We're still seeing the back and forth. We're open, we're closed again, we're open. So the patterns have not evolved, but certainly there's no question. I think in North America, the return is slower than everybody is hoping and anticipating. Every month it pushes another month, and now we're into first quarter of next year. It'll be the big return, and the data just keeps kicking the can down the road. I hope that's the case, and the world gets better, and we get to come back. But the data just shows that there's an anticipated return percentage, and the reality is it's far lower, and folks come in.
So Andrew, for companies, and maybe I'm thinking of our space, self-centered right now, but for companies that haven't thought about the utilization, the retention of their employees, the employee satisfaction, companies that aren't measuring these metrics yet, what's your advice? I mean, what should they be looking at? Obviously they should all be using, your services, but where should they start? What's your advice on somebody who hasn't grappled with this data yet?
I think, Alan, everybody could get a better just handle on how their space is actually used. Just simple things, right? Like, what is the occupancy of your office and utilization, and how is your space actually used? And it's very insightful, I think, when folks realize, holy cow, that's not what I thought. It's not the pattern, and it's not what I thought. And I always thought, oh, we're empty on these days and we're full on these days, and these collaboration spaces are heavily used. And the reality is probably not that. It's not what you think. And so understanding just the basics of how your people use your space today will 100% inform how you will use space in the future, and how you're going to model what kind of space you need moving forward. And it'll be very insightful.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too, and you mentioned it earlier, it's observing the behaviors as opposed to, asking what people think they're going to do, because I think those two things can be quite different.
Folks feeling like, when do they need to be in the office? Well, I need to be in the office when these folks are in the office so that I'm seen in the office, so that I'm part of the team, right? That pressure of being seen. And I think that's a big one to watch, right?
Oh yeah, I mean this is a massive global science experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really cool to see. And we're trying to pattern also, when people are working from home, what is their work kind of persona? What is your pattern, Alan? What's Alan's pattern? Well, Alan, I can get data around Alan's pattern. You're on Teams, you're using things that are collecting data. We can capture that data. We can see when Alan comes into the office. We can see when Alan works at Starbucks. We can start to unfold Alan's persona and how Alan uses space, and how can we design space that's more effective for all the Allans of the world.
Oh, I worry that it'd be very dull, but
but you know what I mean? When the company gets down to that level of data, which is coming, we can start to create better space that's most effective.
Yeah, I mean, the future is not going to be lacking data. There's going to be more and more of it to sort of paint a picture.
As you said, separate signal from noise. Let's take that thread of data back through your career, Andrew, because this isn't your first rodeo. You founded multiple companies. How has your relationship, your data journey changed over time, and how you view and use metrics?
Yes, not my first rodeo. I find it really interesting because when I first started out and I built a services-based company, and it was a different animal, right? It was about making money and profit. It was a profit-generating kind of exercise, a services-based organization. And in my early days, I remember E-Myth Mastery was a book that I read about systematizing how to systematize a business. Everything is a process. Everything can be measured. Everything, kind of results in how do you build a company? Well, if you don't measure it and you don't track it, you don't understand it, then you're not going to be successful. And that kind of set me out on a journey of definitely saying, okay, well, I got it now. If these are processes, they can be systematized and measured, and that's going to result in our ability to understand our numbers, which understands our costs and our revenue, and you can understand whether you're going to make money, and you can understand whether it's going to scale, right? And every business is like that, a standard business. And then when I got into a venture-backed tech company and started Relogixs, and we raised capital, well, it's different, and your metrics change with respect to the audience and who's looking at them. If you're trying to run a company and it's a SaaS company, your metrics are very much different from your product perspective, and your lens changes, and you have to develop a set of metrics for the audience and make sure that you're crisp and clear on what those metrics are that are important to them. So if it's your investors, it's one lens. If you're operating the company and it's to your team and leadership team, it's a different lens. You got to understand what the lens, you got to understand the audience, you got to understand each of those, but each one is also, we're not doing things that haven't been done before, and there's methodologies and approaches, and you can easily find them and apply them and learn quickly and adapt quickly. You're not inventing the metrics as far as how a SaaS company runs, and you're not inventing the metrics of what a venture investor is looking for with respect to metrics. If you just get the best practice out there and lean on it pretty good, then you can move pretty quickly. And I think that's what I've learned. Don't have to reinvent it all. There's lots out there you can get your hands on and just start working on it.
Let me jump in there because, something that is dear to my heart and important to Klipfolio is we're really at the core of it trying to help people succeed with data. So when I say that phrase, succeed with data, what does that mean to you?
Well, firstly, Alan, I love that mission. I'd like to use it for Relogixs if I could. No, it's so relevant, obviously, because our clients, our corporate real estate customers that we serve, right? We're trying to help them succeed with data. That's what we're doing too, but it's in the lens of our customer community. And we've always been a data company. So for me, that resonates. Obviously, it's totally near and dear to what we do every day.
And if you were to build on that, Andrew, and our last question for you today, what one piece of advice would you give to other founders to help them succeed with data?
Really understand where you are in your journey. So if you're just starting out and you're looking for product market fit, get close to your customers and your product and understand the metrics associated with that stage of growth and be really crisp on that and knowing what you're measuring to try to get to the next stage. When you arrive at finally product market fit and it looks like you're going to make it, you're into the growth, the messy middle, I like to call it, then it's the next stage, and you've got to grow up and look at that next stage of growth and understand, okay, now what's important here and what am I measuring now and how do I build out the data that I need to inform these metrics so I can, go through the next stage of growth of the company as I go along. It's a journey for sure, and there are different things you got to pay attention to and care about at each phase of that growth journey that you're on. And I think that's the important part, is to recognize, where are you, what is important right now, and what are you measuring to try to demonstrate that you're being successful at each of those stages.
I love looking at metrics in different stages. It just brings so much clarity to exactly what you're measuring. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. Andrew Millar is the CEO of Relogix. We've chatted about hard